Welcome, kind traveler, to another journey into the silent echoes of the past. Tonight, I invite you to step gently into a world that once breathed, fought, and trembled beneath northern skies. Perhaps you are listening as you drift towards sleep. Or perhaps your thoughts are already wandering between waking and dream. Wherever you are, and whatever hour the clock shows, I am grateful you have chosen to share this time. These stories are not told to frighten children, nor were they woven for idle entertainment. They come from the beliefs of a people who lived, each day under skies filled with storms, who heard the voices of the unseen in the howl of wolves and the crash of waves. For them, legends were survival guides, whispered warnings, and echoes of truths too immense to ignore. Tonight, we continue that tradition, stepping into a tapestry of Norse myth and forgotten horror. I spent months studying ancient fragments from Icelandic manuscripts, old folklore preserved in remote valleys of Norway, and whispers carried across windswept Danish coasts. What I uncovered is far darker than the sagas most people know. We have heard of Odin, Thor, Freya, and the twilight of the gods, but those are only ripples on the surface. Beneath lies a sea of belief, so strange and terrifying that it feels less like myth and more like memory. Memories left behind by a people who lived with the supernatural pressing against their very breath. Tonight, I will guide you through one of the darkest cycles of Viking legend, a chain of tales passed down through generations. They are not about glory, not about feasting in Valhalla, or heroism in battle. These are stories of shadows, curses, and oaths too dangerous to utter. We begin with a single spark, the tale of a restless spirit who refused to accept death's embrace. But before the first story concludes, the thread will carry us into darker places, toward revelations that no Viking dared to speak of aloud. Close your eyes, if you wish. Imagine snow drifting over a fjord, and a longship slicing through black waters. The year is 879. The chieftain of this ship, a man called Halgrim Ironhand, had just returned from a season of raiding across the coasts of Britain. His hold was filled with silver, his men with pride. Yet triumph came at a price. In the monastery they burned, Halgrim swore an oath to the dying abettor, promise made in anger and defiance. He declared that no foreign god, no saint or spirit, would ever lay claim to his soul. His life and his death belonged only to himself. It seemed an empty boast at the time, but the Vikings believed oaths carried weight heavier than iron. Words spoken with blood on the tongue could not be broken. When Halgrim fell in battle months later, his men buried him with his sword, believing it would help him guard the clan from beyond. Yet 3 nights after his burial, the village was struck with terror. Men vanished, animals were found torn apart, and witnesses whispered of Halgrim himself, walking again, his face pale as the moon, his sword dragging against the frozen earth. What followed became known as the saga of the Ironhand Revenant. Unlike other spirits, who lingered only briefly, Halgrim seemed bound to the world with a force none could sever. His oath had trapped him. By refusing the gods, he had refused rest. His soul wandered, fueled by rage, unable to recognize friend from foe. Children were hidden indoors. Warriors took turns keeping watch, yet nothing stopped him. Each dawn brought new bodies, their eyes wide with horror. The clan sought answers. They turned to Evolva, a seeress who spoke with the dead and the gods alike. She listened to their pleas and told them a truth they had feared to hear. Halgrim was not alone. When an oath so powerful was made, it created a doorway through That doorway, other things could pass. The Iron Hand Revenant was both a guardian and a prisoner, holding back something darker that pressed against the veil of the living. If he were destroyed without proper rites, that doorway would open fully. The Cirrus offered a ritual. 3 warriors must willingly allow their spirits to be touched by Halgrim's torment. Only by bearing his rage within themselves could they guide him to the far shore where the dead belong. But the ritual was not without cost. Those who took on his fury risked losing their own souls, becoming revenants themselves. 2 men agreed, and a third joined reluctantly, a young skald named Leif, who had never raised a sword. They gathered at the burial mound beneath the pale northern lights, chanting old words, calling to Halgrim's spirit. The ground shook, and from the earth rose the Iron Hand Revenant, his eyes like burning coals. One by one, the warriors stepped forward, letting his fury pour into them. 2 fell to the ground, screaming, their hearts bursting from the strain. The skald alone remained, trembling but alive. Through him, the Revenant's voice spoke, telling of a place beyond mortal sight, place where oaths had shape, where broken promises became beasts of claw and fang. Halgrim begged release, and with his final cry, the young skald collapsed. The Revenant's body crumbled to dust, and silence fell over the mound. But Leif did not die. He lived, though his hair had turned white in a single night. From then on, he wandered from village to village, warning people never to swear oaths in anger, never to bind their souls with words too heavy to bear. Yet, in his sleep, he spoke of what he had seen. He described a bridge made of screaming souls, stretching across a gulf of darkness, and beyond that gulf, shapes moved, waiting. What he glimpsed would become the seed of the next legend, the tale of the Black Chalice. This second story comes from the rocky shores of western Norway, where fishermen told of an artifact unlike any other. It was said to be a chalice carved, not from wood or metal, but from the skull of a giant who had fallen in the first war between gods and frost. The cup was lined with silver, and when filled with blood, it never emptied. Warriors believed it granted strength, but its true power was far more terrible. A jarl named Styakar the Red discovered the chalice in a burial mound. His men warned him to leave it, but greed clouded his mind. He drank from it, and indeed he grew stronger, striking down enemies with impossible force. But with each drink, his shadow grew longer, stretching against the ground even when the sun was overhead. And soon the shadow began to move on its own. At first, it was subtle. His men saw the shadow raise a hand when Styakar's arm was still. They noticed it walking a step behind him, even when he stood still. Then came the night when the shadow did not follow at all. It wandered into the huts, standing over sleeping children, whispering words that froze the heart. The people realized the chalice was not a gift of the gods, but a vessel that carried thirst from another realm. The shadow was not Styakar's, it was the spirit of the chalice itself, feeding on blood, yearning to step free from the walls of darkness. The wise remembered Leif's words of the screaming bridge, and they believed this chalice had been shaped. From that same realm, each drop of blood poured into it did not quench hunger, but nourished the creatures waiting beyond. They urged Styakar to destroy it, but he laughed, drunk with power. Only when his own son was found lifeless, his eyes hollow, did he realize the curse he had unleashed. In despair, he sought help from Astrid the Farseer, a name that appears again and again in these tales. She told him there was only one way to contain the chalice. A man must willingly pour his own lifeblood into it until none remained. By surrendering everything, the chalice would be filled to its brim, sealing its hunger for a generation. Styakar, racked with guilt, agreed. Before the clan, he bled himself dry, his final breath whispering into the cup. The chalice grew silent, its shadow retreating. It was buried again, deeper than before, though whispers say it still waits, thirsting for the day it is found once more. From the revenant to the chalice, a pattern begins to emerge, those vessels and bonds that pierce, the veil between worlds. Each tale seems to hint at a deeper truth, that the Vikings did not simply believe in gods and spirits, but in a fragile boundary holding back chaos itself. The next story shows what happens when that boundary begins to fail. It is called the Night of the Wolf Song, and it comes from the forests of Sweden. There was once a clan renowned for their wolf hunters. They wore pelts as trophies, believing it gave them the cunning of their prey. But one winter, after a great hunt, they heard something strange. The skins they had hung above their fires began to sing, not in human words, but in long, mournful howls that shook the rafters. The howls did not stop. Each night they grew louder, until it seemed the whole forest was joining in chorus. The people grew restless. Children cried in their sleep. Warriors muttered of ill omens. Then the disappearances began. Hunters would leave at dawn and never return, their tracks ending at the edge of the trees. Soon, the missing returned not as men, but as wolves that walked on hind legs, their eyes still human, filled with pleading terror. They circled the village, howling the song of their stolen skins. The elders said this was the punishment of the Wolf Mother, a spirit older than Odin himself, who despised those who wore her children as trophies. She was unweaving the hunters, stripping away their human skins as easily as they had stripped the wolves. One by one, the clan dwindled, until only the chieftain remained. Desperate, he offered his own flesh to the Wolf Mother, begging her to end the curse. She accepted. By morning, the village was gone, the huts standing empty, the fires cold. Only paw prints remained, leading into the endless forest. Travelers still claimed to hear the wolf song on winter nights, a chorus of voices, both human and beast. Some say those hunters are still alive, trapped between forms, their souls stretched thin across fur and bone. Others whisper they are not cursed men at all, but the beginning of a new order, where no difference remains between hunter and hunted. 3. Legends, bound by a common thread, oaths that chain souls, vessels that drink life, and transformations that blur the line between man and beast. Each carries the weight of terror, yet each hints at something greater, a shadow pressing closer. To the mortal world, our journey tonight has only begun. If you are still awake, then the shadows of the past have not yet released you. Perhaps you are resting, your breath steady, or perhaps your thoughts are drifting like a ship caught between stars and sea. However you listen, I am grateful you remain. Tonight we step deeper into the same world of Norse horror that began with the Revenant, the Cursed Chalice, and the Wolf Song. These tales are threads of the same tapestry, and the further we follow them, the darker the weaving becomes. In the last tale, we ended with the Wolf Song and the warning of the Wolf Mother. But that was not the end of the story, only a prelude to something far greater. For in the sagas of the North, every curse, every revenant, every supernatural terror seemed to converge toward one name that scholars even today hesitate to speak. Astrid, the Far-Seer. She was not a queen, nor a warrior, nor a scold. Yet her name echoes in the fragments of many different legends, always arriving at the heart of calamity. Some say she was chosen by the Norns themselves, cursed to wander from village to village, guiding mortals through the storms of fate. Others whisper she was not fully human, but half of something older, her blood carrying traces of the who had walked the earth before the gods shaped the 9 realms. Whatever she was, Astrid appears again here, in the legend known as the Shadow of the World Tree. To understand the terror of this story, we must return to Yggdrasil, the World Tree, that binds the 9 realms together. The Vikings did not speak of it as a symbol, but as a living reality. Its roots were said to pierce the underworld, its branches spread across the heavens, and its trunk stood somewhere in the mortal world, hidden, perhaps, but present and vulnerable. Like any tree, Yggdrasil could sicken, and when it did, all of reality trembled. The story begins in the year 912, in the mountains of eastern Norway. A series of strange plagues swept the land. Crops withered overnight, animals gave birth to twisted offspring, and hunters returned from the woods with eyes clouded white. Unable to see, but still claiming they glimpsed things moving in daylight. That should never have been. Villagers whispered of a sickness in the earth itself. They turned to Astrid, who had by then become infamous as the only one unafraid to speak of such things. She told them a truth they could barely understand. Yggdrasil, the Tree of Worlds, had grown a shadow. It was not natural darkness, not simply the absence of light. This shadow was alive, stretching through the roots, feeding on the lifeblood of creation itself. Every oath broken, every cursed object, every soul twisted by unnatural forces, the shadow grew stronger with each. It was the hidden hand behind Halgrim, the Revenant, behind the black chalice, behind the wolfskins that sang. All of these were symptoms. The disease itself lay in the heart of the World Tree. Astrid gathered the bravest of the clan and led them into the deep forest, where she claimed the roots of Yggdrasil could be felt most clearly. For 7 nights they walked, deeper and deeper, until the trees themselves seemed to twist in unnatural shapes, their bark pale as bone, their branches clutching at the sky like skeletal hands. Finally, they reached a clearing where no birds sang, no insect crawled. At the center stood a vast root, thicker than a longhouse beam, emerging from the ground like a serpent. But the root was blackened, pulsing with something foul. And worse, it cast a shadow that did not match its shape. The warriors who followed Astrid fell to their knees in terror. The shadow of the root stretched across the clearing, but instead of mirroring its form, it showed figures moving, countless. Figures, writhing, whispering, reaching with hands of smoke and ash. These were the dead, bound not in Hell's domain, nor in Valhalla, but trapped in the dark reflection of Yggdrasil's roots. For every oath broken, a soul was chained here. For every cursed relic, a piece of shadow was woven. Astrid explained what this meant. If the shadow continued to grow, it would consume the roots of Yggdrasil entirely. And when the roots fell, the 9 realms would collapse into the void, swallowed by the creatures waiting beyond the screaming bridge. The only hope was to cut away the shadow before it grew stronger. But how could mortals cut something not made of flesh or wood, but of oaths, curses, and betrayal? The answer came in whispers. The shadow itself spoke, its voice echoing from every direction, neither male nor female, but endless. It offered the warriors a bargain. Give themselves freely, body and soul, and they would not only be spared, but made kings of the shadow world. They would reign when the 9 realms fell, lords of eternal night. Some of the men faltered, tempted by its promises. Others wept, clutching their axes, knowing no blade could sever such a foe. Only Astrid remained firm. She stepped forward, chanting words that had been taught to her not by human mouths, but in dreams that came from the Norns themselves. She carried no weapon of iron, only a staff carved with runes that glowed faintly in the still air. With each word she spoke, the shadow writhed and screamed, for in the old tongue she reminded it of its true nature. The shadow was not a separate being. It was made of human weakness, every betrayal, every broken vow. Without mortals feeding it, it could not survive. But as she spoke, the shadow retaliated. Figures tore themselves from its depth, half-formed bodies of smoke and blood, their faces, the likenesses of those who had once lived in the village. Mothers saw their lost children. Warriors saw fallen comrades. The shadow knew their grief and used it as a weapon. The clearing filled with the cries of the dead, begging not to be abandoned. Many of the warriors broke. Some rushed forward, embracing the figures, only to be dragged screaming into the black soil. Others fled into the forest, never to return. Still Astrid stood firm. She struck the root with her staff, and a burst of light shattered the clearing. The shadow shrieked, and pulled back, retreating into the earth. The root itself remained blackened, but the spreading had been slowed. For a time the world was safe, but Astrid paid a price. Her hair, once golden, turned white in an instant. Her eyes, once clear, became clouded with darkness. From that day forward, she saw the world only in shadows, and though she survived, she carried the mark of the world tree's disease in her very soul. Some say she lived for many years after, wandering as she always had. Others claim she vanished into the forest, becoming one with the shadow she had fought. Yet her warning remained. The shadow was not destroyed, only delayed. Each broken oath, each cursed artifact, each transformation of man into beast would nourish it again. And when it grew strong enough, even the gods themselves would tremble. This is why the sagas do not speak only of valor, but of restraint. Why the old people warned never to swear lightly, never to take more from the world than was needed, never to break the fragile balance, for they believed every choice fed either the tree or its shadow. So, dear listener, remember the tales we have followed, the revenant bound by his oath, the chalice that drank shadows, the wolves who sang, and now, the root of Yggdrasil itself, blackened by human frailty. These are not separate stories. They are pieces of the same whole, warnings etched in memory. Tonight, we stop here, with Astrid's voice echoing still. But in the next part, we will follow another thread. For if the world tree had a shadow, then so too did the gods. And what dwelt in the hidden places of Asgard was something even the Allfather feared to name. Rest now, if you can. The night is long, and the shadows wait. The night is still with us, my friend. If your eyes are heavy, let them close, for the voice of the past does not vanish when sight fades. It lingers like a distant fire, carrying you onward through darkness. In our last journey, we followed Astrid, the Farseer, as she faced the shadow beneath Yggdrasil, the sickness growing in the roots of the world tree. She slowed its spread, but the wound remained, waiting, feeding, whispering in silence. Yet the story does not end in the forest. The shadow's touch reached higher into the realm of the gods themselves. For what festers in the roots will one day creep into the branches. And so our tale carries us into Asgarden in glory, not in triumph, but in dread. The people of the north believed the gods were mighty, but not invincible. Odin could be tricked, Thor could be trapped, Freya could be wept into despair. Even the shining halls of Valhalla could be shaken by forces too old to name. This was the heart of their fear, that the gods themselves were vulnerable, and if they faltered, what chance had mortals? Astrid spoke of this after her confrontation with the root's shadow. Though her eyes had grown blind to daylight, she began to dream of visions far beyond Midgard. She told of walking beneath branches of silver light, hearing the creak of a vast tree above her, and watching as a darkness moved even therein the skyward halls where the gods dwelled. The shadow had found its way into Asgard. The legend that comes next is called the Feast of Hollow Gods. It begins not among mortals, but in the golden hall of Gladsheim, where Odin sat with his kin. A great feast was held after a battle in Jotun, with mead flowing, laughter echoing, and songs rising to the rafters. Yet one thing was wrong. The fire in the center of the hall cast shadows that no one recognized. They did not match the gods who sat around the tables. Instead, they showed figures twisted and strange, their faces blank, their mouths open in endless hunger. At first, the gods ignored it. Perhaps they thought the fire was playing tricks, or Loki was at his mischief again. But then the shadows began to move on their own, even when the gods sat still. They reached toward the tables, their fingers grazing the food, their mouths opening wider. One by one, the platters of meat grew cold, untouched, though the gods still ate. It was as if the feast itself was being drained of life. Odin, who had sacrificed his eye for wisdom, saw what others would not. He struck his spear against the floor and declared that the feast was not for them, but for the shadow feeding beneath their joy, their strength, their laughter, all of it was being consumed. The hall grew silent. The gods turned to Loki, who smirked but said nothing. Even he knew this was beyond his tricks. It was then that Astrid's name was spoken in Asgard. Odin remembered the mortal woman who had faced the shadow at the root, and he sent Hugin and Munin, his ravens, to find her. The birds flew across worlds until they came upon Astrid, walking alone with her runestaff, guided only by her dreams. They perched upon her shoulders, whispering in her ears, leading her toward the Bifrost. When Astrid entered Asgard, the gods did not greet her with honor. Many scowled, angry that a mortal should set foot in their halls. But Odin silenced them. He told them this was not the time for pride. If the shadow could reach Asgard, then even their divinity was at risk. Astrid was brought before the feast, where the shadows of hollow gods still danced. She raised her blind eyes and listened. She said the voices she heard were not the dead, nor the living. They were promises, unkept words, abandoned, vows left to rot. Every oath sworn by the gods themselves, every lie, every betrayal had been feeding the shadow for centuries. And now the shadow demanded payment. The gods shifted uneasily, for though they were mighty, they were not blameless. Odin had broken oaths to the giants. Thor had slain when he had sworn mercy. Loki had twisted promises until they bled. Even Freya, beautiful and sorrowful, had promised love she could not give. All of these lay upon them like chains, and the shadow had gathered each link, forging them into its own strength. Astrid declared that if the gods wished to survive, one of them must pay the price fully. A god must surrender every ounce of their divinity into the shadow, binding it for a generation. The hall grew silent. No, God spoke, for this was not death, it was worse. To give up divinity was to become mortal, fragile, and forgotten. At last, A voice answered. It was not Odin, nor Thor, nor any of the Aesir. It was Tyr, the god who had once lost his hand to bind the wolf Fenrir. He had always been the god of sacrifice, the one willing to bleed when others hesitated. He stepped forward, declaring that he would bear the weight of their oaths. The gods protested, but Odin allowed it, knowing there was no other way. The ritual was done that night. Astrid carved runes into the floor of Gladsheim, drawing a circle of ash. Tyr stepped within, raising his arm. As he spoke the oaths the gods had broken, the shadows howled and surged toward him, wrapping his body in coils of smoke. He did not resist. He welcomed them. For hours the hall shook, the fire dimmed, and the gods watched as their companion was consumed. When the smoke cleared, Tyr stood no longer as a god, but as a man weak pale, his divine light extinguished. But the shadows were gone. The feast was silent once more. The gods gave him a seat still, but no longer as an equal. He was mortal, now destined to die. Yet in his frailty there was strength, for he alone carried the weight of the shadow, keeping it chained for a time. Astrid warned them it would not last. The shadow would return, hungrier than before, and when it came, no single sacrifice would suffice. And so Tyr walked among men, a god fallen, his hand already gone, his power extinguished. Some say he taught mortals secret rites, warning them of the shadow's hunger. Others claim he lived quietly until age claimed him. But the sagas whisper that when he died, the shadow returned to claim what remained, and that his soul still lingers between worlds, half mortal, half divine, neither free nor bound. The feast of hollow gods is not remembered in triumph. It is remembered in shame. For it showed that even the Aesir fed the shadow with their lies, that even gods feared the reckoning of their own oaths. It showed that the sickness of Yggdrasil was not caused only by men, but by the very beings who claimed to guard them. Astrid left Asgard after that night. The gods offered her riches, even a place among them, but she refused. She walked again into the mortal world, her staff tapping against the ground, her blind eyes turned inward. She knew this was not the end. She knew that the shadow was only one part of something larger, something that had been waiting since the first sparks of creation, and so she travelled north, beyond fjord and forest, beyond the lands of men, into the wastes of eternal ice. For she had seen in her dreams that there was something stirring there, older than gods, older even than the shadow, the source of all hunger, the first darkness. That is where we must follow her next. But not yet. For tonight we rest at the table of Asgard, where shadows once ate beside the gods, and where a single sacrifice held back the end of all things for a time. Rest now, if you can. The fire grows dim, but the story does not end. The next step will carry us into the frozen north, where the first darkness waits. The fire is lower now, dear listener, and perhaps your eyes are half closed, but still the story winds onward, soft as snow, dark as a winter sky. We left Astrid walking north, away from Asgard, away from men, guided only by her dreams and the whispers of something older than shadow. She had turned her back on halls of gold and songs of feasting, for she knew a deeper truth. The sickness of Yggdrasil was not the end. It was only a sign, a tremor before the great shattering. The dreams had shown her the norther wastes where no tree grew, where no fire could burn for long, where the ice itself seemed to breathe with memory. The people called it Enderhem, the home of endings. Few dared enter, for those who did rarely returned. Those who came back spoke of shapes moving beneath the ice, vast and slow, as if the land itself were alive. Astrid walked there with no company, save the staff in her hand, and the runes carved into its wood. Her steps sank into the snow, her breath rose like smoke, and still she pressed on. Days became weeks. The sun vanished into endless night, the stars cold and sharp above her. She ate little, drank less, and yet she did not falter, for the dreams pulled her forward, always forward. On the 13th night she came to a plain of black ice, wide as the sea, smooth as glass. The wind stilled, and all the world seemed to listen. Beneath her feet she saw shapes moving, not shadows this time, but forms vast and coiling, older than language. Their movements were slow, yet certain, like serpents sleeping in the marrow of the earth. Astrid pressed her palm to the ice and felt not cold, but heat ancient, suffocating heat, as if a great furnace slumbered below. Here, the dreams had told her, lay the first darkness, not the shadow of Yggdrasil, not the whispers of broken oaths, but something deeper, from before the worlds were made, before Odin stole fire, before the Aesir fought the giants, before men raised their first stones. In the yawning gap of Ginnungagap, where fire and ice first met, something else had stirred. It had no name then, for there were none to name it. The sagas call it the hunger. It was not a being as mortals know, with shape or voice. It was the emptiness that waits when light falters, the silence after all sound dies. It had no desire but one, to consume, and in consuming, to unmake. The gods had buried it beneath the ice when they forged the realms, but such things are never destroyed. They only sleep. Astrid knelt on the black ice, her blind eyes open, her lips whispering the runes she had been taught. She called not to gods nor men, but to the Norns, the weavers of fate, asking them to show her the truth. And they answered. The ice split, not with sound, but with silence so deep it pressed against her chest. From the crack rose not smoke, not shadow, but absence and emptiness that seemed to devour the stars above. Within it shapes moved, familiar yet twisted. She saw the wolf who had sung in the woods, the revenant Halgrim, the cursed chalice, the root of Yggdrasil blackened and sick. All were threads of the same tapestry, all drawn by the same hunger. The first darkness showed her what was to come. Ragnarök, as skalds had sung it, with fire and thunder and gods battling giants, but as a slow unraveling, not a war, but a famine of existence. The tree would wither, its roots hollowed. The gods would fade, their names forgotten even in death. Mortals would wander, starved of hope, their voices swallowed before they reached the air. All things would be consumed, until nothing remained but the hunger, waiting again for another spark, another chance to devour. Astrid did not weep, though her body shook. She had walked too far to despair now. She raised her staff and struck the ice. The sound rang through the plain, and the shapes below stirred. For a moment the hunger paused, as if curious. Astrid whispered words no mortal should know, words she had heard only in her dreams. She offered herself, not as sacrifice, not as prey, but as a vessel. The hunger moved upward, pressing against the ice until it cracked and shattered, black. Shards fell into nothingness, and a hand of absence reached for her. Not made of flesh, not of shadow, but of the void between stars. It touched her chest, and for an instant she felt every oath broken, every child lost, every hunger unsatisfied. Every silence that had ever swallowed a song, and then it entered her. Astrid fell, the ice closing above her, sealing the plain as though nothing had been disturbed. For 3 nights she did not rise. On the 4th she stood again, her staff glowing faintly, her white hair spread like frost. But her breath no longer smoked in the cold. The air bent around her, quiet and unnatural. She walked back from the plain of ice, carrying the hunger within her. The sagas do not agree on what happened next. Some say she returned to the villagers, her voice low and hollow, warning them to keep their oaths, to feed the world tree, to remember their dead. They say her presence withered crops, but her words saved souls. Others claim she vanished into the mountains, her body no longer her own, her voice speaking not with human tone, but with the echo of absence. A few whispers she walks still across snows and seas, neither living nor dead, keeping the hunger asleep for as long as she endures. But all agree on one thing. From that night, the world grew quieter. Winds stilled in forests where she walked. Rivers froze sooner, animals fled before they were seen. The hunger was no longer trapped beneath the ice, it walked the world in her body, waiting, always waiting. The skalds, who dared tell this tale, warned that every silence might be her passing, every stillness her presence, that when your fire dims for no reason, or when your breath hangs too heavy in the air, she is near. Astrid the Farseer, vessel of the first darkness, not enemy, not ally, but reminder that all things end, and the hunger waits patiently for its due. And yet there is another whisper, softer than the rest, that Astrid still fights within, deep inside the emptiness, her will holding back the tide, that though she carries the hunger, she has not surrendered to it fully, and that as long as she endures, the world endures. So we end this part, not in terror, but in silence, for silence is her gift and her curse. The next step of the saga will not follow Astrid alone, but the ripples she leaves in the world. Kings who fear her, the warriors who hunt her, the skalds who sing of her with trembling voices. For when the hunger walks the earth, all men must choose to feed it or to resist it. Rest now, listener. The ice stretches far and the silence deepens, but the story continues. Always it continues. The silence spreads. Listener, you have felt it yourself, have you not? When the fire dwindles and the air grows heavy, when words stumble before they leave the tongue, when even birds hold their cries, that is when her shadow passes. Astrid, the Farseer, no longer mortal, no longer only herself, vessel of the first darkness, keeper of the hunger. It is said that when she returned from the black ice, the world noticed, not at once, but slowly, like snow gathering on a roof until it caves. The first to censor were not the kings, not the warriors, but the skalds. The singers of men felt her silence most keenly, for it stole the breath from their songs. A skald named Einar of the Ashen Hall told this. He had been singing in a longhouse, his voice carrying over the clash of mugs and the clatter of knives, when suddenly the words faltered. He tried again, but his tongue felt thick, his chest hollow. Around him the hall stilled, as if struck by some unseen frost. Then the fire guttered, and in its dimming he saw a woman standing at the door, blind, pale, hair like frost, staff in her hand. She said nothing, she only listened. Einar fled that night and never sang again. He told the tale in whispers, saying the hunger had walked into his song and stolen it forever. Other skalds began to fear her presence. Some tried to sing of her, but their verses grew strange, unfinished, breaking in silence before the last line. They said she could not be bound by rhyme, for silence cannot be measured, but kings care little for scolds' fears. When word spread of a woman who stilled the wind and froze rivers, they thought not of dread, but of power, to hold such a figure. Near was to wield fear over friend and foe alike, so they began to hunt her. King Holder of the Wolfhelm was the first. He sent 20 of his finest bearing chains of iron blessed by priests. They found her walking by a fjord, the water stilled, flat as glass. They circled her, spears ready, shouting commands. She did not flee. She only turned her face toward them, her blind eyes empty as the sky. The men rushed. What happened then is told in many ways. Some say the chains shattered before they touched her. Others say the men froze where they stood, their bodies turning brittle as frost until they cracked and fell into dust. A lone survivor crawled back, lips torn by cold, whispering that she had not lifted a hand, had not spoken a word. The silence had done it all. Halder raged, but he never sent men after her again. Yet not all kings feared. Some sought to worship. In the northern wastes rose a cult called the Keepers of Stillness. They painted their halls in black pitch, extinguished all fires, and spoke only in whispers. They believed Astrid carried not curse but salvation, that when the hunger swallowed the world, she would choose who passed gently into nothingness, and who would be devoured, screaming. They carved her likeness in wood and bone, a woman with eyes closed, staff in hand, mouth sealed. Other clans despised them. They burned the black halls, slew the whispering priests, scattered their followers into the forests. But no matter how many they killed, the cult returned, always in secret, always multiplying. For silence spreads easily, more easily than flame, and so her presence became a fracture in the north. Some feared, some worshipped, some hunted, but all spoke of her. She was no longer Astrid the Farseer, no longer a mortal woman. She was silence walking, the pale seer, the mouthless one, vessel of hunger. Still she wandered. Some winters she was seen by hunters at the edge of the ice, standing motionless for days, her staff planted in the snow. Some summers she passed through villages, blessing no one, cursing no one, yet leaving fields barren in her wake. Children born in the nights after her passing often carried strange marks, eyes pale from birth, voices that never rose above whispers. Mothers feared them, fathers abandoned them, but skalds whispered they were her children, though no man could claim her as wife. It was not long before Asgard stirred again. Odin's ravens flew wide, bringing him word of silence, walking. The Allfather knew what she carried, for he had once glimpsed the hunger in the gap of creation. He gathered the gods, demanding counsel. Some urged to slay her, fearing what she might become. Thor struck his hammer against stone, eager to crush the vessel before it overflowed. But others counseled caution, remembering Tyr's sacrifice, and the price it had demanded. Could any god bind the hunger again without unmaking themselves? Loki laughed, as he always did, but his laughter was thin. He said Astrid was neither enemy nor ally, she was a mirror. She showed the gods what they would become when their songs faded and their names were forgotten. They raged at his words, but none denied them, for even gods are bound by silence in the end. And so the gods did not descend. They watched, they waited, and Astrid walked on, untouched, unseen by divine hand. But among men the fear deepened. Raiders began to carve charms. Against her runes of sound and song hung on their ships to keep silence from the sails. Warriors struck drums before battle, not only to rouse courage, but to keep her away. For they said silence before combat was a sure sign she was near, and that no man who fought in her presence would leave the field alive. Skalds grew quieter. Songs of glory gave way to laments, verses sung in half voice, as if afraid to call her by name. Some say that was the true beginning of the twilight of the gods, not fire, not giants, not wolves, but silence, spreading from tongue to tongue, until even the gods would not be remembered. And Astrid, she did not speak of her burden. She gave no teaching, no command. She only walked. Some say this was her resistance, that by refusing to unleash the hunger, she chained it a little longer. Others whisper she was fading, her will thinning, the hunger stirring stronger with each passing year. That one day the silence she carried would not be hers alone, but the world's. The tale reaches us in fragments, listener, but always with the same hush at its heart. A hush that grows with each telling, until the voice falters and the fire seems weaker. Even now you feel it, don't you? The pause between my words, the weight of the stillness, that is her gift, that is her curse. But the saga is not ended. For where silence spreads, so too does resistance. Men began to gather in secret, skalds who dared sing against her, kings who swore oaths to defy her, seers who sought to bind her. They knew they could not kill her, but perhaps they could hold her, as Tyr had once held the shadows. They began to weave a net of sound, of voice, of memory, a weapon not of steel, but of song. And so another thread begins. Not only Astrid, not only gods, but mortals who choose to rise. For silence may swallow one voice, but many together. Perhaps even the hunger cannot devour them all. But that is for another night. For now, let the hush settle, let the fire dim. Remember Astrid as she walks, staff in hand, silence in her wake. Whether you fear her or follow her, whether you curse her or worship her, know this, she does not stop. She never stops. The silence moves, and we move with it. The hush lingers, listener, like frost on a window. You know by now that Astrid does not rest. She moves across the north, leaving silence in her wake, and the people tremble. But where fear spreads, so too does defiance. Even in the shadow of the hunger men seek to kindle a spark. It began with skalds. 4 songs are the first to die when silence comes. A handful of them, those who had not yet abandoned their voices, gathered in the ruins of an old hall on the coast. The sea groaned outside, but inside the air was still, as if even the waves bent to listen. These were not great singers, not famous men of renown. They were broken ones. Einar, who had lost his tongue to silence, but carved runes of song into. Woodbringer, the widow, whose voice cracked with sorrow yet still rose. Old Kolf, whose harp had only 3 strings left, but whose fingers bled each night as he played. They met in secret, whispering at first, then daring to sing, not loudly, for fear of drawing her ear, but together, weaving their broken voices into one. They believed Astrid could not devour many if they became a single sound, a single thread of memory. From this belief grew the net of voices. The net was no rope, no chain. It was a weaving of sound itself, laments, chants, broken verses stitched, with runes of power. The skalds taught it to others, children, widows, warriors too afraid to sleep in silence. Each learned a fragment, a single note, so no one voice carried the whole. Only together could it be sung, and when sung, the air shifted. The silence recoiled. Fires burned steadier. Winds lifted again. Rivers flowed free of frost. Word of this spread like hidden fire, carried in whispers from hall to hall. Kings who had cursed Astrid now sought these singers, asking them to anchor their feasts with the net. Villagers begged for a fragment to keep their children safe through winter nights. Warriors carved the runes of the net into their shields, believing the silence could not claim them if the song walked with them into battle. But not all rejoiced. The cult of the keepers, those who worshipped Astrid as salvation, saw the net as blasphemy. They believed silence was the only true gift. Their voices were a stain upon the world. They hunted the skalds, burning their harps, tearing out their tongues. Blood was spilled in halls and fields, and the silence seemed to grow thicker for every singer slain. And yet the net endured. It was never whole, never perfect, but it lived. Like threads tangled in snow, it spread wider than the cult's knives. Could reach Astrid, they say, heard it first on the shore of a fjord. She had been walking 3 days without food, the hunger steady within her when she heard the sound. It was not loud, not sharp, but steady voices, many voices, carrying together. She stopped. The hunger inside her recoiled, pulling back like a serpent from fire. For the first time since the black ice, Astrid staggered. She raised her staff, but it trembled in her grip. She did not strike them down. She listened. The singers saw her pale blind frost in her hair, and their voices faltered. Fear pressed in, thick as snow. But one child, too young to know terror, kept singing, her small voice cracked and raw. Slowly the others joined, weaving the fragments of the net again, and Astrid wept. Her tears froze as they fell, tiny shards, glinting on her cheeks. She did not speak, she could not. But in that moment, those who sang said they felt her fighting within herself. Astrid against the hunger, her will against the silence. The net had reached her, if only for a breath. Then she turned and walked into the snow, leaving them untouched. From that day, the singers knew the net was more than protection. It was a chain, not of iron, not of blood, but of memory, of voices refusing to be stilled. If sung strong enough, long enough, perhaps it could bind even the hunger, so the net grew. Secret gatherings in valleys and caves, feasts where the song was. Shared before food, warriors learning the fragments as they sharpened blades. The silence still spread, but the net pushed back, inch by inch, like fire creeping into frost. But the hunger is patient, and Astrid, its vessel, did not fade. Some winters the singers vanished, halls burned, voices silenced forever. Other times, whole villages fell quiet, their people found wandering with lips sealed shut, eyes pale as hers. The cult whispered that Astrid had claimed them, drawing them into her silence as companions. No one knew for certain. The gods, watching still, grew restless. Odin sent dreams to seers, demanding they pierce the weave of fate. Some returned screaming, their minds shattered by silence. Others returned mute, unable to utter a word. Only one spoke clearly, a woman named Herva, who said, "The net is strong, but Astrid is stronger. She is not bound yet, but she listens. Always she listens." And this is the truth at the heart of the tale. Astrid is not only silence, not only vessel. She listens to the singers, to the voices raised against her, to the world that still dares to speak. Whether she listens with longing or despair, none can say. But as long as she listens, hope stirs. So now the saga turns, not only of one woman walking north, but of a world learning to resist her. The net of voices is sung in hidden places, in halls and huts, by broken men and fearless children. The silence waits heavy as snowfall, but the song lingers still, and you, listener, sitting by your dimming fire, you too are part of it. Every word heard, every breath carried into the night, is a thread in the net. Even silence listens, even silence bends, if enough voices stand against it. But the hunger is patient, always patient, and Astrid still walks. Her footsteps are light, her staff steady, her blind eyes turned toward places unseen. The song holds her back, for now, but no net holds forever. So we end this part, as we began, in silence. Yet a silence not empty, not final, but waiting, trembling, like the pause before a song begins again. For the story is not done. Not for Astrid, not for the singers, not for you. The fire sinks low, the hush deepens, but the voices will rise. They must. The silence does not sleep, listener, it waits. You have heard how the Scalds wove their fragments into the net of voices, how mortals sang against the hush that Astrid carried, and you have heard how she listened. Always she listens. But there are other ears in the world. The gods, who once watched from their high halls in patience, now lean closer. For when mortals stir such power, the divine cannot look away. It was Odin who grew most restless. The All-Father sits upon Hildskjalf, his seat of seeing, from which he gazes upon all realms. Yet when he turned his eye northward, he found only dimness. The silence reached even there, clouding his vision, muting his ravens. Hugin returned, with wings heavy, his mind weighed down. Munin returned late, feathers rimed with frost, and for a day he could not speak. Odin struck his spear against the floor and swore that if silence spread into Asgard, the doom of gods would hasten. But he was cunning. He did not rush with hammer as Thor would have, nor did he ignore it as Frigg counseled. Instead, he called Loki. Now Loki, the sly one, had laughed at Astrid before, saying she was but a mirror, showing the gods their own forgotten end. But even Loki's laughter thinned when he spoke of her now. He remembered her face, blind and pale, yet listening, always listening. The trickster does not fear many things, but he fears being unheard. For a lie unspoken is no lie at all. Silence, to Loki, was death itself. So Odin bade him go, not with spear or flame, but with words. Test the net, said the All-Father. Test the woman. If mortals truly weave a chain that can hold her, then we must know. If not, we must prepare for the end. And Loki went, not as God, not with fire in his hair and sharpness in his tongue. He walked as a wanderer, cloak ragged, staff worn, voice soft. Among men he passed, slipping into their feasts, listening to the fragments of the net, learning their notes, their rhythms, their laments. Some he joined, singing low, his voice blending with theirs until none knew it was his. Others he mocked, testing their courage, seeking the weak threads. Always he watched, always he measured. He found the net strong, stronger than he expected. It held not because of beauty nor skill, but because of stubbornness. Children who could barely carry a tune sang with cracked voices. Warriors who had lost half their teeth bellowed with what remained. Old women, bent and brittle, croaked verses into the night. No single thread shone, but together they wove a strength Loki had not foreseen. Yet he also found fear, for many sang with trembling lips, their eyes darting to the shadows, terrified. She would appear, and when fear is present, silence has its way. It was on a night of deep frost that Loki's test came. He sat with a circle of singers in a valley cave, their fire burning low, their voices weaving the net steady and slow. Then, without warning, the flame faltered. The cave grew colder, the breath of every singer hanging thick in the air. A hush fell, heavier than stone, and she entered Astrid, silence walking. Staff in hand, eyes pale, steps soundless on the rock. The singers froze, but their voices did not. A child, the same kind who had once faced her on the fjord, sang on. Then another joined, then another. The net wove itself again, though fear pressed on every throat that Loki, hidden among them, felt the hunger stir. It pressed into his bones, seeking to hollow him. Yet the net pushed back, and he knew this was the moment Odin had sent him for. So he sang, not as trickster, not as liar, but as one thread among many. His voice joined theirs, steady, sharp, carrying fragments of tales he had twisted through ages. And Astrid paused. She turned her blind face toward him. Though she could not see, he felt her gaze pierce him deeper than any eye. She knew him, God among men, serpent among truths. She listened to him longer than to the rest, and he, sly though he was, felt something he had not in long ages, unease. For in her silence there was no mockery, no trick, only listening. She did not strike, she did not bless. She only listened, and in that listening Loki heard himself, his voice, his lies, his boasts, his betrayals. And for a moment he felt the weight of all that silence had swallowed before. The singers kept their net, their voices weaving, until Astrid turned away. She walked back into the frost, leaving them alive. The fire in the cave steadied once more. When it was over, the singers wept. Some said they had touched her, that she had nearly broken. Others said they had only delayed her, that next time she would not turn away. But Loki said nothing. He slipped from the cave before dawn, carrying the truth to Odin, and the truth was this: the net could hold her, but only just. It was not a chain, not yet. It was a thread stretched thin, trembling with each step she took. And Astrid herself was torn, not fully lost to hunger, but not fully herself. The silence within her could still listen, could still weep, could still hesitate. This both heartened and terrified the gods. For if she was still Astrid, then she could still choose. And choice meant uncertainty. Would she resist forever? Or would the hunger within her one day overwhelm even the faint threads of song she allowed to reach her? None could say. Thor urged war, demanding to strike her down before she grew stronger. Frigg counseled patience, saying mortals must decide their own fate, for it was they who wove the net. Tyr, scarred from the old binding, said nothing, only gazed into the fire with one hand clenched. And Odin, ever cunning, remained silent longest of all. At last he said, "We will not move, not yet. Let the mortals sing, let the woman walk. For every step is a test, and every silence a measure of what is to come." And so the gods waited. Still, but Astrid walked on. She passed through villages, leaving quiet fields behind. She stood on cliffs where no gull cried, on rivers where no fish leaped. And everywhere she went, voices wove the net, trembling, faltering, but never breaking entirely. The saga tells us this. Silence and song moved side by side now, each pressing against the other, neither yielding fully. Astrid walked, the net followed, the hunger listened, the mortals resisted, and above them all, the gods watched, patient and afraid. Even now, listener, you hear it, the hush between my words, the echo of voices far away, singing low against it. The world balances between them still, and though you do not sing, your breath, your heartbeat, even your listening, it is part of the net. Remember that when the silence presses heavy in the night, remember that when no wind stirs, when the fire guttered low, when you feel watched by unseen eyes, she may be near, but so too are the voices. For as long as Astrid listens, there is hope. As long as mortals sing, the net holds, fragile, trembling, yet holding. For now, the hush thickens, listener, as if the night itself draws closer to the fire. You know now that the gods leaned down from their high halls, that Loki walked among men, that Astrid still listens though the hunger coils within her, but mortals are not united. For where some sing, others kneel to silence, and it is here, in this division, that the tale darkens further. The keepers had long whispered in shadow. They lit no fires, sang no verses, carved no runes. They walked barefoot across snow, their lips sealed by ritual, their eyes closed in, mockery of Astrid's blind gaze. Wherever the net grew, they crept close to cut it apart. They slit the throats of singers, shattered harps, burned scraps of runes. Yet until now, they had worked in secret, in silence. But hunger breeds boldness, and silence spreads. So it was that one winter's eve, beneath a blood moon, the keepers struck openly. They came upon a great hall where the net was strongest, where singers had gathered from many lands. The hall was alive with sound, laments, chants, children's voices, braided with warriors, roars. The net shimmered like air before storm, holding back the hush pressing at its walls. And into this defiance the keepers came. They entered not with stealth, but with silence sharpened into weapon. Cloaked in ash, their mouths sewn shut with black thread, they carried staffs tipped with shards of ice said to be stolen from Astrid's path. They walked through the snow without sound, though their feet broke the crust. They passed through the outer fields where guards watched, and the guards did not see them. They reached the hall itself, and only when the doors burst wide did their presence become known. The singers faltered. The net trembled, yet some continued, voices raw with fear. The keepers advanced, lifting their staffs high. Where the shards gleamed, silence spread like frost, choking sound, pulling words from the air. Harps died mid-chord, flutes shrilled, then fell still. Men clutched at their throats, women gasped in terror. The hall became a grave of half-begun notes, but not all. Some voices clung. A boy who had lost his father sang of him still. An old woman whose bones ached with every breath forced sound from her lungs. Their fragments wove together, brittle but unbroken. The net flickered, faltered, but held. The clash that followed was not of sword against sword, but of voice against silence. Keepers pressed forward, their mouths bleeding behind threads, their staffs glowing with frozen hunger. Singers pressed back with song, weaving faster, harder, desperate. The hall shook with the strain, as though its beams themselves might splinter. Beneath the weight of silence and sound locked in war, it is said, one figure walked among the keepers, taller than the rest, her staff heavier, her eyes colder. Some whispered she was Astrid herself, come to claim the singers. Others swore she was only their high priestess, a woman who had given her tongue willingly to silence. Whoever she was, her presence deepened the hush. Even the strongest voices faltered before her. Even the net shivered near breaking. And then something strange occurred. A single note rose above all others. Not loud, not pure, but steady. It came from a child, a girl with hair like frost, standing barefoot on the hall's floor. She sang not the net's fragments, but something older. A tune carried down by her grandmother, half forgotten. A lullaby, simple, fragile. Yet, as her voice rose, the others followed, weaving it into the net. The lullaby became the net, reshaping it, strengthening it. The silence recoiled. The staffs cracked. The keepers staggered, clutching at their mouths as the black threads split and bled. Some fled into the snow, vanishing without sound. Others fell where they stood, their bodies still as statues, as though silence had claimed. Them whole, the high priestess remained longest. She raised her staff high, the shard gleaming with hunger, and for a moment it seemed the net would tear apart. But the lullaby grew louder, woven from dozens, then hundreds of voices, and the shard cracked. With a scream, the first sound to leave her lips in years, the priestess fell, and silence with her. The hall shook once more, but this time with release. The net held. The keepers were broken, yet victory came bitter. For many voices lay still, their threads cut forever. Instruments lay shattered, runes smouldered in ash, and outside the snow fell heavier, as though the hunger itself had taken notice. Astrid, far to the north, is said to have paused in her walking. She lifted her pale face to the sky as if listening. A tear of ice slid down her cheek. Was it grief? Was it rage? None could tell, but her steps grew quicker, her silence deeper, her staff striking the earth with greater force. And the gods, watching, whispered among themselves. Odin saw that mortals could resist, but at great cost. Frigg wept for the children lost. Thor cursed the shadows that gave the keepers their strength. Loki only smiled thinly, saying, "Chains are strongest where they are tested, but chains break, too." So the war of voices continued. Singers rebuilt their net. Keepers gathered anew. In darker places, plotting stronger strikes. Astrid walked still, her hunger neither defeated nor sated, listening always. And you, listener, hear the echo of that clash even now. The hush that presses at your window, the faint hum in your ears, the trembling silence before you sleep. Do not think yourself apart from it, for each breath, each heartbeat is part of the net, whether you know it or not. The fire burns low, the night deepens, the silence waits, and the song must rise again, for Astrid is walking still. The fire burns low, listener, the hush presses close. You have followed Astrid across snow and shadow, across silence and song. You have heard of the net, woven from broken voices. You have seen gods lean down and keepers strike bold. Now the tale bends to its end, for no path can walk forever. Even silence must meet a final stillness. Even song must find its last note. The net grew stronger after the night of the keepers. Singers carried the lullaby across valleys and fjords. Children whispering it at sleep, warriors chanting it before battle, mothers crooning it to newborns. Its threads bound tighter, its weave steadier. Where once a few sang in fear, now many sang in defiance. Silence still pressed, but it no longer fell so icily. Astrid felt this. Each step grew heavier. Where once her staff struck ground without sound, now faint echoes followed. Where once her breath drew nothing, now it stirred the frost in the air. The hunger within her raged. But something else stirred too. Memory, remnants of the woman she had been before. The silence took her, a voice long buried, whispering inside her chest. The saga says she came at last to a wide plain where many had gathered. Singers stood in circles, their voices weaving the net like a great dome of sound. Runes carved in stone glowed faintly, harps trembled with resonance, children's lullabies drifted like smoke. All threads bound there, all voices joined, the strongest knot of defiance yet. Astrid walked to the edge of the plain. Silence spread with her, frost creeping along the grass, birds falling still in the sky, wind dying in the trees. The voices faltered at her presence, but did not cease. Instead, they grew steadier, each thread tightening into the net. She stepped forward. The ground cracked with each strike of her staff. The air trembled with each breath of her hunger. The singers pressed harder, weaving, binding, trembling but unyielding. Then Astrid stopped, her blind eyes lifted, her pale face turned not to the singers, but upward, for the gods were watching. Odin leaned from Hildskilf, Frigg wept in her hall, Thor gripped his hammer, Loki smiled his thin smile. All waited for her choice, for no god could decide it now. This was Astrid's step to take, and so she listened. The lullaby reached her first, soft, fragile, sung by children at the plain's edge. It pierced deeper than any spear. It cracked the ice within her chest. Then came the laments of widows, the chants of warriors, the trembling voices of the old. Each thread struck her, pulled at her, bound her. She could not turn away. The hunger screamed. It clawed within her, demanding she unmake it all, demanding she silence every voice, demanding stillness eternal. But her staff trembled in her hand. Her breath shuddered. And in that moment, Astrid remembered. She remembered her own mother's voice, low and tired, singing her to sleep long ago. She remembered her own daughter, now long gone, whose laugh had once echoed in the night. She remembered the woman she had been before silence claimed her, and she wept. The tear froze on her cheek, but it fell still. Her staff slipped from her grasp. The ground shuddered as it struck, but this time it made a sound, a sharp crack ringing across the plain. The singers gasped, the net flared, the hunger howled. Astrid fell to her knees. She pressed her hands to her face, and for the first time in many years, she did not listen, she spoke. Her voice was broken, cracked, hollow with years of silence. But it was a voice still. She whispered a single word. Some say it was her daughter's name. Others say it was simply enough. The net surged. Every voice, every thread, every rune blazed with strength. The hunger shattered like glass. The silence split open. A wound torn in the sky, and from it poured sound. The wind, the sea, the cries of birds, the laughter of children, all that silence had swallowed before. The keepers, hidden in shadow, fell screaming as their threads unraveled. The shards of ice cracked and melted. The frost withdrew from the earth. And Astrid herself lay still, her face peaceful, her body fading like mist in the dawn. The singers wept and sang on, binding the net not as a weapon now, but as a remembrance. They sang of her walk, of her hunger, of her final choice. They sang not to bind her, but to honor her, for in the end she had chosen to listen, not to silence, but to song. The gods were silent in their high halls. Even Odin set aside his spear, for they knew what mortals had done, faced silence itself, and held it, not with swords, not with fire, but with voices, with fragments, with song. And so the saga ends here. Astrid, silence walking, no longer roams the snow. The hunger sleeps, broken. The net holds still, woven not in fear but in memory. Yet the hush lingers, as hush always will. For silence is never gone, only waiting, and you, listener, hear it even now. Between my words, behind your breath, around the crackle of the fire, it waits, patient, endless. But you know also that your voice, however small, however fragile, can hold it back. One note, one fragment, woven with others. So when the hush grows heavy, remember Astrid, remember her final step, remember the net of voices, and do not be silent, for silence listens, always, but song endures.